Sorry for the delay, everyone. Welcome to the 24 Hours of PASS Summit Preview. We're excited you could join us today for Marco Russo's session, Create Your First SSAS Tabular Model. This 24 Hours of PASS event consists of 24 consecutive live webcasts. Sessions will be recorded and posted on the PASS website soon after the event. My name is Aaron Nelson. I'm a consultant and SQL Server MVP. I have a few quick introduction slides before I hand over the reins to Marco. He will speak for 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll move on to the Q&A where Marco will be answering any questions you may have. If you have technical assistance or have issues, please type in a question, and someone will be able to assist you. To maximize your screen, use the Zoom button located at the top of the presentation window. Feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A field at any time, and if it's an easy question, I'll go ahead and answer it. The questions pane is located on the right side of your screen. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll read off your questions to Marco. Note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to complete it. It will show up on your screen. I'd like to take a moment to thank our event partners. The staging of the 24 Hours of PASS would not be possible without their support and dedication. They're the reason this event is available free of charge. Thank you to our presenting sponsors, Microsoft and Dell Software. Next, as you may know, this 24 Hours of PASS is a preview of PASS Summit 2014, the largest conference for SQL Server and BI professionals. With over 5,000 attendees representing 2,000 companies from 52 countries, Summit is a time to connect, share, and learn with peers and industry partners. PASS Summit is not only a week of intensive learning and knowledge sharing that will offer strategic insights, it's a time to network and rub shoulders with industry experts like Marco and myself. Taking place in Seattle, Washington from November 4th through the 7th, PASS Summit will feature over 190 world-class sessions across 5 topic tracks. These 24 Hours of PASS sessions provide only a mere glimpse of what you can expect from PASS Summit. Find out more at passsummit.com. And if you register by September 26th using discount code 24HOP14, you'll get $200 off the registration fee. And now please let me present the speaker of the hour, Marco Russo. Take it away, Marco.
Okay. Okay, so as you can see in the slide, I'm a business intelligence consultant and trainer. I worked with Analysis Services since 1999. The very first release of Analysis Server at that time was the name. And I wrote several books about Power Pivot, Analysis Services, and several white papers. You will find a link to a website where you can download the paper and articles later in the presentation. The session today is about how to create your first Analysis Services Tabular model. So there are no prerequisites here. If you don't have any experience with Analysis Services, either multidimensional or tabular, that's fine. If you have some knowledge of SQL Server, it's certainly better because we will use SQL Server to extract data and to create our first model. So before starting, let me just introduce a few information about Analysis Services. This product has been on the market since 15 years ago. At the beginning, it was called Analysis Server, and in 2005, it was renamed to Analysis Services, and it had a data model that we call multidimensional. The multidimensional data model is based on the assumption that you can describe the reality in terms of dimensions, attributes, hierarchies, and measure, which is different than the relational model that we are used to use, for example, in SQL Server. Starting with SQL Server Analysis Services 2012, Analysis Services had a new type of data model, which is called Tabular. The Tabular data model is based on another engine, which is called Vertipack, or the marketing name is X-Velocity Memory Analytical Engine, which is a completely different engine that uses the same infrastructure of analysis services in terms of storage, in terms of I/O, backup, maintenance tools, and so on. But the very engine is different and is based on a simpler data model, which is based on tables and relationships, just like in a relational database. However, from an external point of view, you may see the same, the two different models, the multidimensional and the tabular one, as they was the same model. And we call this unified model the BI semantic model, or BISM. Any client that is able to access to the BI semantic model can query both multidimensional and tabular. For example, if you use Excel, Excel knows MDX, which is the language used by a multidimensional data model. But the same language, MDX, can be used to query a tabular model, which internally uses another language, which is DAX. At the same time, PowerView can be used to query tabular. PowerView is a client that natively supports DAX, but you can also use the same language to query multidimensional. So you can query multidimensional with DAX. So we have two different engines, two different languages, but both models can be queried using MDX or DAX. So now, when you start a new project, you may ask yourself, should I use Analysis Services Multidimensional or Analysis Services Tabular? Because Analysis Services 2012 and 2013 offers both models for a new project. And the idea is that for a new application, you can choose all of these tools. You will see today how to create a new tabular model, and so it's up to you to make a decision between one model or the other. There are certainly reasons to favor one model or the other if you have very specific requirements, but in general, for I would say 80% of the projects could be solved by using both models. Probably tabular is simpler to learn. DAX is a simpler language than MDX, so the learning curve is easier in tabular than in multidimensional. The same technology used by Analysis Services Tabular is used also for Power Pivot, for Excel, and for SharePoint. And in reality, Tabular has been created as a technology for Power Pivot first. So this is just an introduction to clarify what is tabular in terms of architectural point of view. But what we'll do today is spending most of the time looking at a demo and seeing how to create a tabular model. We will see other details that are listed in this slide, but before moving forward, I will just clarify that in order to use tabular, you have to install Analysis Services first. And when you install Analysis Services, at a certain point in the wizard, you have to choose the tabular model. If you use the default is multidimensional. So there is a certain point in the setup where you have to choose tabular. Once you do that, you install an instance of Analysis Services that runs in tabular mode. You might have several instances of Analysis Services in your machine, each one running in a different mode. We have three different types of working instances that you can have: multidimensional, tabular, and SharePoint, Power Pivot for SharePoint. Power Pivot for SharePoint is a particular setup that can be used only when you install Power Pivot for SharePoint, but you need a SharePoint instance also to do that. So we only are interested in this session about tabular, but remember, in order to connect to tabular, and to create a tabular project, you have to install this instance first. You see, the second one is the icon that you should see in SQL Server Management Studio after you installed a tabular instance. So assuming that you did the right setup, what happened? So let's start looking at Visual Studio. Once you install Analysis Services, depending on the version of Analysis Services, if you install Analysis Services 2012 or 2013, you may have a different version of Visual Studio, and you can also download a different version of Business Intelligence tools for Visual Studio. Once you have the setup done correctly, you have this Business Intelligence template, and for Analysis Services, you can choose between a new multidimensional project or a new tabular project. You can also start a new project by importing an existing Power Pivot data model. But today, we will start a new Analysis Services Tabular project. Once you do OK, you obtain a new solution in Visual Studio, and this solution has only one file, which is called model.bim. As you see, this file is described here as a window that is completely blank. And in reality, what we are doing, we are editing an XML file, which has an extension BIM. That is the file that I'm showing you now. So as you see, what we will do later is just using a graphical user interface to edit the content of this XML file. But at the end, we are just editing this XML file. So let me close this and open it again by using the graphical user interface. A model is a container for data which are divided in different tables. And the easiest way to get this table into the data model is to import these tables from an external data source. So if you go in this model menu and you click on import from data source, you can choose between many different data sources from which you can import data. This day, we will use only SQL Server, but as you see, SQL Azure, SQL Parallel Data Warehouse, and many others are directly supported as possible data sources. So I connect to my instance of Analysis Service, of SQL Server 2012, and I choose AdventureWorks for this test. I'm using AdventureWorks Data Warehouse, which is a particular version of AdventureWorks that contains data modeled in a star schema or in many different star schemas or snowflake schemas. So it's a data warehouse and not an OLTP database. And this is a best practice. It is better if you have data denormalized in a star schema. The second step is specifying the impersonation information that Analysis Services will use when will refresh data, reading data from SQL Server. I just choose the service account and click Next. And then you can choose between importing a list of tables and views or writing a specific query for a single table. I click Next so I can see all the tables and all the views that are available in this SQL Server database. For example, I may be interested in getting a fact internet sales table, which is a table that contains one row for every transaction, for every sales transaction made in made by the AdventureWorks company. And I add a few related tables that contains information about the product and information about the date, for example. So once I do that and I click Finish, something interesting happens. Oh, well, before clicking Finish, I can preview and filter the data. So if I'm not sure about what is the content of these tables, I can just open this window and take a look at the preview of the data that I can download from these databases. As you see, we have a list of content from this table. I can repeat the same for the other tables, but now I just click Finish. And what happened at this point, you see that the data are read from SQL Server, and the entire content of the tables that I selected is imported somewhere. actually it seems that this data has been imported into Visual Studio, because I have these tables here. I can browse into the data, I can go and look at the entire content of the table, and if I go in fact into SSAS, as you see here, we have 60,000 rows, and I can browse my table until the last row of the table. It is very quick, but actually I don't have data in Visual Studio. I have my data in a particular place that is called a workspace server. I will go back, I will come back to this detail in a minute. However, now that I imported these tables, I also imported relationships between these tables. As you see here, I have my tables with several arrows that connect different columns of the tables. For example, here I see that the dim date is connected to the fact internet SSAS through the order date key connected to the date key for this relationship, and every relationship can have different columns connected together. The same here and so on. These relationships have been created based on the information about the foreign key constraint in SQL Server. But what happened if some of these relationship was not in the data model? It is not a big issue, because we can actually create a relationship also by simply using the drag and drop here and connecting the columns that are part of the same relationship, as you see. So the diagram view is not just a display of the content of the data model, it's also an editor for certain properties of the data model. Now, I have actually already a data model that I can browse with Excel. So if I click on this button, Excel, I can open a window in Excel and I can browse the result of this data model. As you see, I have a pivot table in Excel that has been connected to Analysis Services. I can actually see all the columns of my tables here. I can put, for example, the color of the products in the rows. I can put the calendar year in the columns, but I don't have any measure. So in order to see some data, I need to create some measure in my data model. So I go back in Visual Studio, and please note I didn't close neither Visual Studio nor Excel at this point. I go back in my table, in my grid visualization, and I know that in fact Internet SSAS I have a few columns that contains data that could be aggregated together. For example, I have this column sales amount, and I may want to create the sum of sales amount in my data model. So actually now I created a measure that is called sum of sales amount, and in this area of this formula window, I have actually what is a DAX formula. This is the definition of a measure defined in DAX, which is the language of tabular, of a tabular model. DAX means data analysis expression. And in this case, it's a very easy formula. It's just a sum of the content of a column. Now, if I go back in Excel, and please note I didn't process anything, I just click on refresh of this pivot table. As you see now here, I see my measure sum of sales amount, and I can put the sum of sales amount in my pivot table. And what you see now is that each cell has the value of all the sales for the products that are red made in 2005, then 2006, 2007, and so on. We also have a correct format string for this measure, and actually I'm already navigating into my data. I can, for example, add the month number. Let me see, month number of year here, and I can see the data splitted month by month. So I am able to create this data model that can be navigated. I can certainly do much more, but as you see, with just a few clicks, I already created a simple data model. Before moving forward and showing you other features of the data model, I would like to clarify what happened under the scene when I imported the data. If you remember, I said, okay, my data model is just an XML file. So if I close this data model now, and I open it in a text editor, as you see here, I have a longer file, but I do not have here a copy of the data. So my project actually contains only a description of the data model, of the table names, the column names, and the relationships, but I don't have any data in my data model. So where are my data? When I double-click here, I see content here in the data model. I see rows and values in columns of these rows, and I can also see data appearing here in Excel, but I'm not querying SQL Server when I browse the pivot table. So what happened? Fundamentally, we can see what happened by connecting with SQL Server Management Studio to Analysis Services Tabular. As you see, we have this tabular project Marco with a global unique identifier, which is a database that contains exactly the tables that I imported before. So when you edit a project in Visual Studio connects to Analysis Services Tabular and creates a temporary database, which is called a workspace database. And this workspace database contains actually a copy of the data that has been read from SQL Server. So this workspace database is not actually what the user should see. This is just for the usage in Visual Studio. And every time you import a new column, a new table, and create a new measure, you immediately deploy, Visual Studio immediately deploys the changes to this database in Analysis Services. For this reason, I can continue to browse my database even if I close Visual Studio, if I configure the workspace database in a certain way. In fact, if I click on my model file here, model.bin file, as you see, we have here a few information like the workspace database, the workspace retention, and the workspace server. The workspace server is the name of the instance of Analysis Services that will be used to create the workspace database. And the workspace retention is the operation that has to be done when I close Visual Studio or I close this project. I can choose to keep the model in memory in my tabular instance, or I can choose to delete the workspace completely, or I can just unload it from memory. Analysis Services Tabular keep all the data in memory, in RAM, in a compressed way. It has a very good compression algorithm, but of course, if you create several projects in your development machine, you may not want to keep all these data models in memory. So by only keeping in memory the one that you are editing, you would obtain a better use of the RAM of your server. But you can decide to keep it in memory, because in this way, when I close Visual Studio, my workspace database will be still in memory. However, let's keep this one. What you should do when you say, okay, my project is good now, is good for being used to be used by a regular user, you will deploy it. When you click deploy, the target database is another one and is defined in the properties of the project. So this server name is the name of the server, the instance of Analysis Services, where we do the final deployment. And here you can see also the database name, which is by default the same name of the project. So if now I click deploy, what happens is that a new database is created, and this time the database will be still on the server, even if I close Visual Studio. In fact, as you see, if I refresh the database list now, you see my tabular project 3 now, and this is the workspace database. This is the deployed database. If I close Visual Studio now, and I refresh my databases list, you will see that my workspace database disappeared. However, if I open Visual Studio again, as soon as Visual Studio open and sees that I worked before with this project, a backup of the database is restored in memory in Analysis Services. So the workspace database is available even if I don't refresh the data from SQL Server. As you see, if I refresh, you see here my workspace database again. However, I suppose that my user, when we'll use Excel, will connect it to the Tabular project without the extension, because that project is the real one. And the user experience should be something like this one. I connect to Tabular. I connect to my Tabular project tree, and I click Finish, and I have my pivot table where I can browse my data as I did before. So this is how the workspace database works. Now let's see what are the basic operations to transform the data model that we can do in Analysis Services. We can do several things. First of all, we can create different measures. So for example, I could create the quantity, the sum of quantity. Let me find here, order quantity. And I could create also, for example, the margin, which could be this one. I could create another measure here. This time I will create this by hand. And so my margin is equal to the sales amount minus this one. As you see, I'm creating a measure just like I will create a measure in, I calculated the cell in Excel. As you see, now I can also specify a few properties. For example, the format. I would like to display this as a currency. So you have a few properties. Every time you choose a measure or a column, you may specify several information about the display format. Each column has not only a data format, like the currency here, but also a data type. This information is usually automatically retrieved by reading the metadata from the data source. But you might have the need to change the data type according to a particular need for storing the data that you have. You can also decide that you don't want to show a certain columns to the user. So for example, imagine that you don't want to show these columns to the user. You can just right-click and hide these columns from the client tools. Fundamentally, each column is now hidden, which is the property that you see here. So there are several ways to manipulate the properties that you see in the data model. Another interesting feature is the calculated column. You can extend the data model by creating other columns. So a measure is something that you can put in the measure area of the pivot table. So for example, if I refresh this connection, you see all my other measures. So I see the margin, I see the sum of order quantity, and so on. But I can extend the data model by creating other measures, other columns. And a column can be used also to filter data. For example, imagine that I want to create a column that says, okay, if the fact internet sales unit price is less than unit price. Okay, if this column, so if the value that I have in this column for the same row is lower than 10, then I want to display 0 low. Otherwise, if this is greater than 100, I want to display 1, 2 high, and otherwise I display 1 medium. I'm just creating in this case a string. I could create a number, and the data type is automatically inferred by the syntax that I created. I just rename this column into price band, and I just created a segmentation of the table, because as you see, if I scroll down, I see this string that is different row by row. At this point, you may think that I'm doing a very stupid thing, because I'm creating 60,000 rows with a string that has only 3 different values. But since the data is compressed in memory, this column will need only a maximum of 2 bits for each row, because there is a dictionary for each column that is automatically created when you process the data, and there is also compression. So in reality, several rows, contiguous rows that have the same value, will be compressed much more than just 2 bits. So this is actually a very efficient way to store data, and so it's not a problem creating a long description here in a calculated column. Why I created a calculated column? Because I want to use this new column here to split my data. So for example, I have my what is the name that I used? The price band here. So instead of color, I can use the price band, and I can see the total of sales that I made at a high price, medium price, or low price. And as you see, at the beginning of our business, we only had the products that that had a cost higher than $100. And starting in 2007, we started to sell also other product types. And as you understand, this is much better than just putting the price, because if I put the unit price here, I will see data grouped by each single value of the price, which is not exactly what I probably want to do. So this is just an example of the feature that you have using DAX. In order to understand the syntax that you have to use here, you have to learn DAX, which is not so hard to learn, because fundamentally is a language that derives from the Excel formula language, even if there are a few concepts that are important to learn in order to understand how to manipulate calculation, getting data from different tables and across relationships. So this is a very interesting way to create data models, because at this point, my user don't have any knowledge about SQL, but actually can query with a single pivot table, can query different tables connected through relationships in our data model. We can also use other tools to query the data model. So for example, you can create in Excel 2013, you can connect to the data model by using Power View report. So let me show you this. When you connect to Analysis Services, always Tabular, once you choose, let's get the workspace database in this case because I want to show you more measures. At this point, you can choose, instead of a pivot table, you can choose Power View. What is the difference? In a pivot table, you are using MDX to query the data model. When you use Power View, it uses Analysis Services, it uses DAX as a language to query the data model. And this has a few advantages. If you remember, in an Excel pivot table, I can only use measures that I defined in advance, like margin, like sum of order quantities, sales amount, and total product cost. A DAX client has the ability to create measures on the fly. So if I choose to display, for example, I can create here a table that shows data year by year, and sorry, not aggregate here. And I want to see the value of sales year by year. Now you can display this as a bar chart, for example, and you can also put another measure, for example, the order quantity here, and you can use another attribute to split the data, for example, the color. And when you do that, you can also create another chart. Now, what is interesting is that I can, for example, click here in 2007, and I can immediately see what happened here. But what is important, I'm actually using now measures that I created in advance. But I could also ask to display just the total product cost, which is a measure that I didn't create in advance, but this is created on the fly when I move a column that can be aggregated in the values. So DAX has some more flexibility. A few other important information. We have just a couple of minutes and then I will be open to your question. When we browse data, either in Power View or in a pivot table, you may want to control what is the sort order of the data. So for example, if you put the year here and then you put the month, if you put the month name is a string. So there is no knowledge about the fact that January should be before February and so on. So we can fix this by just choosing other properties that we have in our column for the month name. So if I click in the month name column and I can say, well, I want to sort this column in the column menu, you can sort this column by using another column. So let me just, sorry, I was editing the formula. I was in the wrong place. Okay, now I should go here, column sort. Sort by column means I want to display this column sorted by using another column, which is in this case the month number in the year, this one. And as soon as I did this, I just refreshed this table and I see my data sorted correctly, starting from January. This is possible because I'm connected to the workspace database, and every time I make a change here, the change is propagated to the workspace database. So this is an important property that you have. Another important property that you have is the hierarchy, which has to be defined here in the diagram view. For example, what is a hierarchy? Oftentimes you may want to display data by showing the year and then drill down to the month name and then drill down to the date. So I can say, well, I want to create a hierarchy by using these three columns, and I can also change, so this hierarchy is, for example, calendar, and I can change the name of the levels of the hierarchy. Each level corresponds to a single column. So this is the year, this is the month, and this is the date. Once I do this, what I obtain as a result is that in my pivot table, I just refresh, because every time I do these changes, I have to inform Excel that there is something new available in the metadata. So I go in the dim data here, and as you see, now that you have at least one hierarchy, all the other columns are included here in the more fields, and the hierarchy can be used to display the first level of the hierarchy, just the year. You drill down at the month level, you drill down at the day level. And so you define a hierarchy to facilitate the navigation into the data made by the user. This is certainly available not only in Excel but also in Power View if you want to use Power View, which is a feature that is available in Excel 2013 or in SharePoint 2010 or 2013. So let me recap what we have seen. We have seen that the workspace database is created by using a special name that is different for every user. Imagine that you have different developers on the same server working on the same database, so you need the different names because each Visual Studio has its own workspace database. We created a very simple project, and in this simple project we used calculated columns to extend the table, creating values evaluated row by row using DAX formulas. The interesting thing is that the DAX formula that you can use in a calculated column can reach any table in the data model. So you can actually create the calculations that, for example, sum the value in another table considering certain filters. So not only a row by row calculation, but a calculation that can span the entire data model. we have created measures that are used to display data, aggregated data in the pivot table or in Power View. You use the measure grid below the table area to create these measures. And we have in the project different views of the project, the data view and the diagrammatic view. The data view shows the content of the tables, the diagrammatic view shows the relationships and the hierarchies between the tables. We have seen that we can use Excel to query the data model. We can also query the data model by using the SQL Server Management Studio. But in that case, you would use you need to use a query. You need to write your own MDX or DAX query, which is not something that I want to show, that I have time to show today. We have seen also Power View as an alternative tool to query the data model. This is a new data visualization tool that is part of Excel 2013 or SharePoint and Power Pivot for SharePoint, as I said before. More about this will be explained in my pre-con about data modeling in Analysis Services Tabular. I will spend an entire day to show you everything else. So fundamentally how to customize the data model, how to refine the properties of all the columns, attributes, measures, and how to also manage the security, the perspective, how to optimize the process, and many other things. If you want to know more about DAX, there is another pre-con the day after mine. This pre-con from Zero to DAX will be had by Alberto Ferrari, and it will span about the DAX language and the DAX query language for the entire day. So I'm open to your question now. I should have.
All right, we've got quite a few queued up already.
Yep.
The first question that I'll go over is when you downloaded the data into and created the project, did it download all of the data at that point into that database that it created?
Yes, by default, Visual Studio loads all the data that you ask. Of course, usually it's a good practice to define a subset of the data that you will use in during the development. Now, how to manage that is an open question, because you can do this in two ways. You can create a different set of tables, a different database with a reduced set of data for facilitate the development. The second is creating views and attaching your tables to views and not directly to the table. So in the views, you put some where condition that filter the data. Actually, this is my best practice. But you can also set filters when you load data in the, I didn't show that you can apply filters to the data that you want to import. When you do that, you actually reduce the size of the data, but you keep this filter when you deploy. So if you don't want to change the data model when you deploy, the best thing to handle that is to create a sample database or a set of views that will change when you do the deploy, because you will connect to another schema, for example, or to another database with a different set of views. But fundamentally, there is no built-in way to reduce the amount of data that you load. It is up to you to expose a reduced set of data to Visual Studio.
Okay, we've got quite a few more questions here. So is it possible to incorporate the data source view from SSAS? That's one question.
The easy answer is no. The more complex answer is it depends, because you can actually you can connect to different data sources, and you do not have to do transformation when you load data into Analysis Services. So you have to prepare data in advance. However, you can actually create an integration services package that pushes data into an Analysis Services data model. It's not easy. There are some constraints, but actually there is a way to push data into an Analysis Services table directly from an integration services package. I think, I don't remember if we published an article about that, but I can probably, if you send me an email, I can actually send you some link probably about this. By the way, my email is marco@sqlbi.com.
Okay, Marco, we've got a couple questions here asking about the sample data and where they might be able to find that. Would they be able to download this the data that you used in this presentation to?
AdventureWorks database that I used for the demo. I talk about the SQL Server database actually. It can be downloaded from Codeplex.
Okay.
Again, I don't have a slide for that, but
I got it.
It's on Codeplex. So if you send me an email, I will find. But it's easy to find on Codeplex by doing a web search.
Okay. I have one question on my data warehouse is not in the star schema. Can it do many-to-many relationships? Can it work in the tabular model?
Yes. If you go in SQLBI.com, there is an entire white paper just about the many-to-many relationships. Half of the white paper is for multidimensional, but half of the white paper is for tabular.
Okay, perfect.
You have to use DAX. Is not handled by the data model directly, but you can do this in DAX. And the good news is that it's much faster than multidimensional.
Okay. I think you actually covered this one during your session. It was how do you incrementally refresh the new tabular model that was created? Okay,
no. I didn't cover this. We will see. We will see all of this in the pre-con because in 1 hour we don't have time. But actually, you can manage the incremental process in different ways. Fundamentally, you can add data to an existing table. You can, but you cannot remove data. Or you can split your table in partitions and you can process only certain partitions. Or you can do both. So you can add data to a certain partition. So there are several ways to handle that. And when the table is very large, I mean more than 10 million of rows, it makes sense. Or when you want to refresh data during the day, every 5 minutes, for example, you want to add just a few thousands of rows, makes sense.
Okay. Go to other questions. Getting a bunch of them in here now. Can you connect to SSRS report from Power View to drill down on the actual data rows?
Today, no. Today, Power View is not able to be embedded in a web page and is not able to contain URLs to an external report, but I know that Microsoft is working on that. So I hope that in a not so far future we will see some new about that. But today, no, it's not possible.
Okay, here's a good question. Can you install regular SSAS and the tabular model on the same server?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Actually, it is. I have my notebook has many. I have probably 3 or 4 instances of Analysis Services, a few tabular and a few multidimensional, different versions, all work together. The problem is the memory.
Okay.
For a development machine, makes sense.
Okay, and looks like we're going to probably need to only do 1 or 2 more questions, so I'll get to them very quickly. Is there an equivalent of role-playing dimensions in multidimensional and tabular?
No, but it's a bad idea to use a role-playing dimension also in multidimensional for many reasons. So the fact that we don't have that is absolutely not a problem, because you should not use that in multidimensional too. You just duplicate that. You can duplicate the table by creating a view with another name, but the idea is that you should rename all the columns, because otherwise the user interface is very confusing for the user, especially if you use Excel, also in multidimensional.
Okay, and the last one I'll make it is, can tabular model be connected to performance point?
I would say that performance point can query tabular. The answer is yes, but I don't understand what is the point of connecting from tabular to performance point to retrieve data, because performance point consume data from tabular, but is not a producer of data. But unless I don't understand the question, I don't know.
Okay, I'll send you the questions so that you can have a look at it. Yeah. But we're going to have to make that the last question today. Thank you, Marco, for your presentation today.
Okay. Yeah.
It was great. Sorry about the hiccup.